Shinnecock Hills Golf Club and the Shinnecock Nation and really the wider community mourn a really major loss this past week. I'm Joe Shaw. This is 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines. It's our weekly opportunity to sit down and talk a little bit about some of the news that was in the papers this week. That's the Southampton Press, the East Hampton Press, then the Sag Harbor Express, and also at 27east.com. With me today are staff writers Dan Stark, Cailin Riley, and Jack Motz, and our Arts and Living editor, Annette Hinkle. So we'll start with Cailin Riley. Hey, Cailin.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
So we're going to talk again this week about a feature obituary that you wrote, because this is a fairly big deal that Ronnie Leeser passed away. And you just recently interviewed Ron. We did a big piece on him in the big publication we did for the U.S. Open. Talk a little bit about, he was nicknamed Snoop, right?
Yeah. So, as I wrote in my story, he had a lot of nicknames. And, I think that's sort of telling of the kind of person he was throughout his life. If you have a lot of nicknames, it means that you lived life to the fullest and you meant a lot to a lot of different people. And
Yeah, people are very fond of you when they come up with a good nickname for you.
yeah, for sure. So yes, at Shinnecock Hills Golf Club, where he worked for decades as a senior greenskeeper, and he was sort of the specialist of the fairways. We called him King of the Fairways in our headline because that was kind of what he was referred to by some other people that worked with him. But yeah, he was known there simply as Snoop. As a matter of fact, his daughter, Toria Eliezer, shared a photo with me that I just included in the online version of the story. And he's wearing a work shirt from a couple of years ago. And it says Shinnecock Hills Golf Club. And then the nameplate just says Snoop on it.
Is it? I mean, it's almost impossible to overstate how important he was to Shinnecock Hills. And he was, I think you mentioned in the story, the only person who was part of the grounds crew for all of the modern U.S. Opens that were held at Shinnecock Hills. And also he had a connection to the very first U.S. Open held at Shinnecock Hills.
Yeah, Uncle Oscar, as he referred to Oscar Bunn, who played in the second ever U.S. Open that was held at Shinnecock, and he's from the Shinnecock Nation. And so, yeah, he really has this link that goes all the way back. And, the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club, they've had a sort of up and down past with the nation, but in recent years, it's been a much improved relationship, and they really, really valued him and loved him over there. He was just beloved by everyone. Toria, there were so many stories, I couldn't work them into the article that was already probably way too long for our print edition. But his daughter, Toria, told me that her father had taken Toria's husband over there to play golf once, and he was blown away by how every single person that saw him on the course, whether it was people that worked there, members, he was like a celebrity. Everywhere they went, somebody was reaching out to shake his hand or say hi. So he kind of was that person who just everybody loved and knew, universally beloved.
And he had a big role in this year's U.S. He was in his 70s
Yeah.
when he passed away, right?
Yes,
But he had a
75.
75 when he died, but he had a big role in this year's U.S. Open.
Yeah. So, one of the stories I did during the U.S. Open was I set my alarm for, I think it was 1:30 a.m. and I went out to the course to kind of witness the whole morning routine they do over there, which is pretty incredible. Getting the course ready for a huge tournament. There is no bigger tournament really. And, they go out there in the morning with these giant fairway mowers. They're huge machines, brand new, all the technology and bells and whistles you could possibly have on a piece of landscaping equipment. And, they sort of leave this maintenance shed like a cavalry. It's like this huge horde of guys just out there on these machines. And the fairway mowers are kind of the biggest steeds, if you will, of that group. And he's right out in front, just leading the charge. And you just get this sense that that's where he belongs. And it's pretty impressive too, when you think about the fact that he was a groundskeeper there, in the 80s. And back then the equipment was nothing like what it is now, but he kept up with the times. He wasn't like the kind of person who, oh, he got left in the past. He couldn't keep up. He was right out there, doing his thing. And you could tell he was in his element there and he was really happy there.
It's a shame his passing, but in a sense, this last Open gave him a moment in the sun, and it really it seems almost appropriate that he passed away after this Open. He got his opportunity one more time to get recognition for everything he did over there.
Yeah, I mean, he still had so much life left in him, so
Yeah,
it's really
yeah.
sad because, this wasn't of course he was older, but this wasn't someone who, you said, "Oh goodness, this is really coming, he might not be able to do this for much longer." Like he just had a real like cool and collected, quiet confidence about him, but he had a really good sense of humor too. One funny story that his daughter told me that just made me laugh so much was that, um, later on in his life, she had kind of assigned him up for the senior nutrition program over at the Shinnecock Nation. And, you could go there, pick up your lunch or whatever. And, he would get up and get dressed and get sharp, she said, and go over there. And she said that there would be a lot of older ladies in there kind of like smiling from ear to ear whenever he would go in there. He was very popular. And he would joke around with her and say, "Oh, I can't go in there anymore. The ladies go crazy when I go in there. I'm getting everyone's blood pressure up." And, but he was kind of making it a joke. And she said, that was kind of the way he was. He was just full of life and really beloved. And I mean, I could talk about him for much longer, but he was a great guy. And, I just
Yeah,
added
we
some new throwback photos, including one of him with a really big afro, and he just looks so effortlessly cool. So go online and check those out.
Yeah, that's definitely the new photos that went up at 27east.com are worth going to see. We spent a lot of time talking about his connection to Shinnecock Hills, but it's important to say he was crucial to the Shinnecock Nation and that entire community, and just really well known and well loved in Southampton in general.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
loved the story that he introduced his daughter to the game of golf, and that he left her his golf clubs, right?
Yes, he did. And even though he's quite tall, and so she was joking around with him that, you know, shortly before his passing, she was kind of trying to lift his spirits and joking around with him, "Oh, I'll have to have these cut down to be my size." And he was like, "Don't you dare do that." So, but yeah, very poignant. He really loved playing golf too, loved the game of golf. The golf club gave him a standing tee time in his later years, which was a real, sign of how much they loved and appreciated him. And, that mattered a lot to him. And he always was trying to pass on his love for the game to other people. So, a big presence will be really missed.
And the flag flew at half staff at Shinnecock Hills in his honor. I know
Yes.
this was a personal thing for you, Cailin. I think you did a wonderful job on the feature obituary. Cailin, thanks as always.
Yeah, it was an honor. Thanks.
Thanks. Let me bring in Jack Motz, who covers East Hampton for us. Hey, Jack.
Hello, Joe.
So we're having an ongoing conversation now in the paper about the water situation in East Hampton as it related to the fire at the Best facility there, and the fire suppression efforts and how that may have affected the water supply there. Talk a little bit about what's going on with the Suffolk County Water Authority and the town and what they're trying to do now.
Yeah, so basically there's a bunch of agencies that are all kind of involved in this, but really the bottom line is what happened was in January, SCWA detected a PFAS chemical called PFPRA in its wells that are just a little bit to the south of this Best facility, about a quarter mile away or so. And they notified the county in March, and then they ended up suing the operators of this Best facility in June. And that's kind of when this became public. So everybody's kind of been, interacting with this in different ways. The county has been very vocal about, kind of pointing at the Best facility and this fire that happened in 2023. And basically what happened there was the fire suppression systems, it was these sprinkler systems, they are said to have used about 2.2 million gallons of water to put out
It's an
this fire.
amazing number, by the
It's a
way.
lot of water. Those
Yeah.
sprinkler systems ran for about 30 hours. When East Hampton Fire Department was there, they were pretty hands off about it and letting these sprinkler systems do this. So really kind of what's going on now, the town is really now just getting involved. And they sent a letter to the operators of this BESS facility, in the wake of the county actually doing the same. The county wants this place shut down, at least until the investigation is concluded, into the source of it. And basically what the town is asking for is they made 6 sort of demands/requests, where and kind of the big one, is they want there to be water runoff safeguards. So pretty much what they're saying is when this went through the East Hampton Planning Board in 2017, there were these safeguards for oil, right? But there was nothing for water. And just, Kathy Burke-Gonzalez, the supervisor, kind of explains it here when she said, the town relied on technical information provided by the applicant, stating that no liquid within the battery cells could spill and that the only hazardous spillable liquid at the site was oil contained in the transformers and inverters. The approved plans therefore included containment for that oil, but not a permanent system capable of capturing the fire suppression water.
So
that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, we should explain it. So the way this battery energy storage system was created it was essentially a sealed box. And the whole point was that the internal sprinkler system was the fire suppression system. So when the fire department arrived for this fire, they really stayed back and let the fire suppression system work. But the problem is all that water that was used, because these fires burn very hot. We've seen that happen at some facilities elsewhere in the nation where they've really gotten to be major, major fires. It worked well. It kept that fire contained, but it required a lot of water, and that water had to go somewhere, and it all ended up in the ground.
So really what she's asking for and what she's saying is that there should be some physical containment measure to, capture that runoff before it goes into the groundwater, right? So they've kind of, again, there's a bunch of agencies working on this. The County Department of Health Services is responsible for doing the door-to-door testing of the private wells in the area, right? SCWA just handles the public wells. There's 4 public wells there. 3 of them are offline. But so with those private wells, there's about 26 that are said to kind of be susceptible to contamination from this PFAS. Last I heard, they've tested 9, and none of them were over the site-specific 3 parts per billion screening value that they've established at this site.
That's a much higher level. I mean, a much more strict level of concern. Yeah.
So the typical level that they would use is 50 parts per billion. When they tested the wells that are near kind of Montauk Highway and Buckskill Road, the public wells, SCWA's wells, I think those came in around 100 parts per billion. So that was about double the state guideline. But yeah, so the value that they're using, and SCWA says they won't serve any water to anybody that's over this 3 parts per billion threshold, is 3 parts per billion, which is much the state would usually.
But so far those wells haven't tested positive, but they're concerned, I'm sure, that over time, if there is contamination, it may reach those wells as well.
Right. So that's kind of the other parts of this letter that Kathy was sending to the folks, is that there needs to be some sort of hazardous waste containment plan, right? So yeah, a lot of stuff is going on. There's a lot of moving parts with this. There's a lot of agencies involved. The DEC is kind of leading the actual investigation into what happened, and what the source of it was. But the thinking among many is that this BESS fire was what caused it. The DEC is expecting to have its investigation concluded by the end of the year. A lot of this information is going to ultimately be public, so it's going to be interesting to see where it ends up going.
There was also talk in your story about a reservoir. What's that about?
Yeah, so SCWA is also, another thing that's kind of come of this is they're applying for a grant to build a reservoir. Basically, it would be a 1 million gallon storage tank. The water supply, it's been impacted by about 7%, right? So there's a 7% reduced production capacity, which we've been in a drought recently, and we're in peak water usage for the season. So, the being hit by the 7% drop in production capacity is kind of a lot, right? So this, water storage tank would basically be a way of kind of, mitigating that loss in the future if they need to do so.
Got it.
So yeah.
This is important to a lot of folks out there. So appreciate you staying on top of that.
Been a lot of chatter about it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Joe.
I want to introduce Dan Stark, who covers Southampton Village for us. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Joe.
You took a step back this week and did a little bit of a broader story about Stop the Stuff, right? Do I have that right? Is that
Skip
what it's
the
called,
Stuff.
the campaign? And
Skip the
and
Stuff.
it's something that's been talked about in a lot of the local towns and villages, and actually been enacted in 2. Talk about what Stop the Stuff is about.
So, Skip the Stuff.
Skip the Stuff. I'm sorry.
Skip the Stuff is this environmental initiative that's designed to reduce waste from single-use items at takeout orders and restaurants. Kind of what a common problem is, oftentimes people get takeout and there will be plastic utensils, condiment packages included in there automatically. And a lot of these times these items don't get used and, they'll end up on the beaches or in the environment if they're not disposed of properly. So how Skip the Stuff works, if villages decide to enact legislation or are in support of it, restaurants have to ask customers if they would like these items included instead of just automatically including them. If the customer says, yes, I'd like them included, then they'll include it. If not, they won't. So it's as simple as that. And this has been something, because this is a national initiative here, but the Eastern Long Island chapter of the Surfrider Foundation has been a key group that has been lobbying for it in villages around the South Fork over the past 2 years here. And now we're at a point where a lot of villages here are either have legislation codifying it or didn't legislate it, but are in support of it here.
So why is Surfrider? Why is this an issue for Surfrider?
Oh, I spoke with the chair there, Christine Capelli, and she had said that, in a lot of the beach cleanups that they host around the South Fork here, a lot of the most common items that they find are these single-use items from takeout orders there. So really it's just trying to do any little bit to try to reduce plastic waste on beaches and the environment in any way they can. And it's an easy step to do that. Now, they're also, because they've started at the village level here, there haven't been any official discussions at the town levels yet in Southampton or East Hampton, but that's the next step there, and then trying to work their way up to the county level. And there's also legislation in the state legislature that was introduced last year. It didn't make it to a full vote yet, but I know Sag Harbor Village, who I'll talk about in a bit, they had sent in a letter recently in support of that state legislation.
So who is leading? Who is the ahead of the game on this? Who has put this legislation in place?
So if we look at the South Fork, there's 2 villages that have it adopted. East Hampton Village was the first one to do so. They did it back in April of 2024. And then the other village was Sag Harbor, who they adopted it in November, but there's been a renewed push recently in Sag Harbor to do so there. So they're the 2 that have officially adopted it. If you look elsewhere on the East End, Southampton Village, they had some conversations about it in March and April, and they had stopped short of legislating it there because there were concerns from the village board about enforcement and if it would be an overstep to do this, but they are in full support of it there.
And I suspect with a program like this, even if the legislation isn't adopted, just talking about it gets more and more restaurants on board and more people aware of what they're trying to do, and it may just take hold on its own, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in a lot of these places, like when I had spoke with Bill Manger, the mayor of Southampton Village, on this, he had noted, it's still, very early, to see how it all works out, but kind of the big consensus from everybody I've talked to, they've all said, this just sounds like a common sense thing to do here. And I had spoke with a couple business owners and restaurant managers as well, and they all seemed on board for this too. It sounds like there's some places out there that are also looking at other ways they can help the environment, looking at different biodegradable materials for takeout and other ways they can reduce their impact.
Great stuff. We'll keep an eye on it. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate your story. So for Silver Linings this week, we bring in Annette Hinkle, who is our Arts and Living editor. Hey, Annette.
Hiya. How are you, Joe?
So we had a conversation just recently about your talk with John Waters, which I thought was just one of the best things I've read in the paper in a long time. But I think coming very close was your Q&A this week with Fran Lebowitz, who's going to be at Guildhall this weekend. What an amazing conversation you had with her. Talk about what it's like to talk with someone who I think has a reputation for being one of the great talkers of all time.
Yeah. Well, I'm always really nervous that I don't know enough going into these interviews. So I threw some interesting questions out to her. She's got a lot of opinions, which is helpful. So sometimes it's just a matter of hitting the on switch and she'll go.
Yes.
Which is great. Public transportation was one of the top topics we posted on. And she thinks Mamdani's paying way too much attention to the buses. She's like, what about the subways? The subways need to be fixed. So
I thought that was interesting. It's a good point, actually.
Yeah. I mean, she makes a good point that maybe the subways are just too big a problem for Mamdani to tackle. So she also weighed in a bit on her take on Democratic Socialist. She thinks Mamdani smiles way too much. Though she admits that she voted for him. So, and she said you shouldn't really be a Democratic Socialist if you're over 18, which I thought was funny.
I thought that was very funny.
So, so it's interesting. So she's very politically attuned. She doesn't have a cell phone. She doesn't have a computer. So everything that is done needs to be done by mail or landline. So it's very interesting. Yeah. When I interviewed her, they're very specific instructions. You call her landline, let it ring, let it answer, start to leave a message, and then she will pick up. It's just kind of funny. But
you're calling her back in the 1990s,
which is kind of refreshing. It's kind of refreshing that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's her thing. She's very much a Luddite, and that's been part of her identity for years and years and years. Does she have much of a connection? She's going to be in East Hampton. Mm-hmm. Does she have much of a connection to the East End at all?
She said that she used to come out here years ago, back when she said that was potato fields and 6 painters, as she said. But she always stayed with friends out here, and she never bought a house because her lawyer said you're too young to buy a house when she was looking at buying one in 1979. And as her answer to that was you're never too young to buy a house. If you're 7, buy a house, because by the time you're 12, you're going to think, wow, I could have gotten this house for a lot less. So
yeah, that was bad advice.
Yeah. She's like, no one's ever lost their shirt buying real estate in New York City, and probably out here as well. So she does have a slight connection out here. I don't think she spends a ton of time out here. She really seems to like being at home in her apartment.
She's when we think about New Yorkers, she is a New Yorker through and through. Mm-hmm. She has been that her entire career. Is she as curmudgeonly as she seems to be in her stage presentation? She comes off as being sort of, I think it's part of her identity too, is she's a little crabby. Was she like that to talk to?
No, maybe because I hit on the topics that she didn't mind talking about. I actually heard her laugh a couple times. I think she said when she was younger, she felt like she needed to answer every question journalist asks her. Now she's just like, if somebody asks her a question, she's like, I'm not answering that. Next question. So she kind of sets her edges there. But one of the questions she said she got in Boston was from the audience was what happened to Savannah Guthrie's mother? And she's like, how would I know that unless I had something to do with that? So that one seemed to irk her, but it made for a really good talking point in our interview.
So that's what she's going to do at Guildhall, right? She will be interviewed on stage, but then also take questions from the audience.
Yeah, that's how the whole thing is structured. The first half hour is basically kind of the warm-up act, and it's just a Q&A with an interviewer on stage and Fran hitting on some topics, maybe kind of just to get the audience primed for when they're up. So that's about half an hour, very structured, half an hour, and then the interviewer leaves, and then Fran goes and stands at a podium, and she starts taking questions questions from the audience, and she does that for an hour. And the audience doesn't get a mic. I mean, very specific. It's like you have to shout your question. There's no microphone passing for the audience. So she's done this all over the world, and the format is very, very much the same. Which side of the stage she sits on, and how long things go, and she's got it down to a science. And this is her day job.
Who's going to be doing the interview?
That would be me doing that.
You buried the lead, Annette. You're going to be on stage with her, right?
Yeah. This was crazy. So after I interviewed her on July 8th, and I thought, oh, great, my biggest interview of the summer's over. I can kind of relax. And then like a week later, I get an email from Guildhall saying that Fran was very comfortable with our conversation and wanted me to be the onstage interviewer this Sunday for the first half hour. So
I think that's a great choice, and it'll be a very interesting thing to see happen. So thanks, Annette. I appreciate it. Thank you to Annette Hinkle, to Dan Stark, Cailin Riley, and Jack Motz. I'm Joe Shaw. We'll be back next time with another edition of 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines.